I want to cover this matter about Jesus being a socialist. And again, when you read, I'm going to have something to read for you, which I think you'll find kind of comical. In fact, let me get it out here, because I wanted to quote it accurately. But this is one of many places, one of many people that you hear that says this. Mainly, there's a few things that are going on, and it's really always said because of political reasons. And it's people that just can't stand a conservative side of things, and they're very liberal in their view, and everything should be provided. Well, you can't make the case that Jesus was a socialist, and I'll show you how that is. But here's the mentality, and here's how this usually goes down. And again, I could have read excerpts from just about anyone. I'm not even going to give it attribution because it's only a portion of it. And she's just one of many people that tries to make this silly case. Listen to what she says. If Jesus showed up today in Trump 2.0 America, so that tells you where we are, he wouldn't be rubbing elbows with conservative politicians or holding court at a CPAC event. And that's the Conservative Political Action Committee. He also wouldn't be standing outside Planned Parenthood screaming at women, nor would he be lobbying for tax cuts for billionaires while shrugging at the rising homeless crisis. You can just see what a kook. This is a person who's just trying to take all kinds of their own pet political things and make Jesus their champion for it. This is hilarious. No, if Jesus came back today, he'd be flipping over tables at Wall Street banks, railing against the cruelty of for-profit health care, and reminding every self-righteous lawmaker that love thy neighbor wasn't meant to be an optional guideline. These people are hilarious when they start to do this. They start to quote the Bible, but they don't care anything when it says something that disagrees with them. This is like that saying, if you torture the Bible long enough, it'll say anything you want it to say. Yet somehow, in this dystopian version of reality, the loudest voices calling themselves quote-unquote Christians have transfigured Jesus into a capitalist, nationalist, gun-loving conservative who hates immigrants, adores trickle-down economics, and thinks social safety nets are the devil's work. These people are so insufferable, it's just funny to listen to. So, of course, she doesn't try to make a biblical case for this. She just basically says, if Jesus showed up, he'd be like I want him to be. So let's see if the Bible really kind of agrees with what she has to say. Let's look at a couple of things. There are some proof texts that they love to point to, and let's take a look at a couple of those first. Let's turn to Luke 19, because they love this one. And then we'll point out the logical fallacy that's in this, because it's pretty comical. So let me get to it here real quick. Luke 19. In verse 1, we get this. Now, then Jesus entered and passed through Jericho. Now, behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus who was a chief tax collector, and he was rich. So he sought to see who Jesus was, but could not because of the crowd, for he was short in stature. So he ran ahead, climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was going to pass that way. And when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and he saw him, and he said, Zacchaeus, make haste to come down, for today I must stay at your house. Imagine being that guy. He's wanting to get a look at who Jesus is, and Jesus calls him out by name. Something obviously is going to interestingly happen here. So he came down, received him joyfully. But when they saw it, they all complained, saying, he has gone to be with the guest. This man is a sinner. Why? Because he's a tax collector. Okay. So Zacchaeus stood and he said to the Lord, look, Lord, I give half of my goods to the poor, and I have taken anything from anyone by false accusation, I restore fourfold. If somehow I've made an error, I will refund it to them, and with interest. And Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house, because he also is a son of Abraham, for the Son of Man has come to seek and save that which is lost. Now, so here they love to point to this, because here is Zacchaeus, and he gives, of his things, he gives it to the poor. Well, in Matthew chapter 22, let's go there. And in verse, 20. Let's go at verse 15. Let's just read the whole thing. So Then the Pharisees went and they plotted how they might be able to entangle him in his talk. So here are the Pharisees wanting to try to give him a question that either way he answers it, there's no way out. Now, here's what he says. So they said to him, their disciples So they sent to him their disciples with the Herodians, saying, Teacher, we know that you are true and a teacher of the way of God in truth, nor do you care about anyone, for you do not regard the person of men. It's kind of a mischaracterization, but okay, great. They're setting the table up, and of course they've invited the ones that if he said the wrong thing, Herod would hear about this. So here these men are in league with people that they think are fodder for hell, right? Well, verse 23, Tell us therefore, what do you think? Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? But Jesus perceived their wickedness and said, Why do you test me, you hypocrites? Show me the tax money. And so they brought him a denarii. And he said to them, Whose image and inscription is on this? And they said to him, Caesar's. And he said to them, Render therefore to Caesar those things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. And when they had heard these words, they marveled, and they left him and went their way. So, as far as Jesus being a, quote, socialist, that tells us the world in which he lived. It was the Romans. The Romans didn't have a welfare system for the Jews, so Jesus wouldn't have understood a social, system like the people, like this person here who wrote. It just didn't exist in his world. So what we have is rather they were to see to one another. So let's go back to what the law had to say. The law would tell you that you take care of the widows and the orphans, the people who cannot take care of for themselves. But notice it was done within the people. It was not some government edict, and it wasn't taken from someone and given to someone else. It was voluntary among the people to do what was necessary to help their fellow person. So it wasn't a government, and it wasn't socialism. It wasn't a handout kind of a thing, and it wasn't a social safety net. It wasn't intended for everyone, because if anybody could work, they didn't get those kind of things. They were expected to work. It was only supposed to take care of the people who could not take care of themselves, and it was only within the people who were part of the children of Israel. There was no government that would take taxes and redistribute it to someone else. That whole mentality didn't even exist there, nor was the structure there, nor was it there in Jesus' time. The Romans were not taxing the people of Judea and Samaria and of Israel itself and then giving them something back to take care of the needs of the people. That was not what Rome did. Rome took the plunder of the servile nations and took it back to Rome. They didn't care about what people had. So that's why we see in the first church what was going on there. Well, let's turn to the book of Acts and let's see what, quote, socialism would have looked like. So in the book of Acts, we start at chapter 2 rather. Let's start there. There's only 2 chapters that we'll be looking at here. And this is right after Pentecost. Peter preaches this message. Thousands get saved. And it tells us in verse 41, Then those who gladly received his words were baptized, and that day about 3,000 souls were added to them. Then they continued steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine, the fellowship, in the breaking of bread, and in prayers. Fear came upon every soul, and many wonders and signs were done through the apostles. Now, all who believed were together, and they had all things in common. They sold their possessions and goods and divided it among all to anyone who had need. So continuing daily with one accord in the temple and in breaking of bread, house to house, they ate their food with gladness and simplicity of heart, praising God and having favor with all of the people. And the Lord added to the church daily those who were being saved. Notice, who is providing for the needs here? It's not the government. It wasn't that they were being taxed. They voluntarily took of their own things. If they had stuff, they would sell it to help take care of the people who did not, because the government wasn't doing it for the people. This is how the church should be able to operate, yet the government does not help the church function in this world, and the church will never have the resources to take care of the needs of the people as it should be. So the church is able to help in its own groups. If that church, if the people who are in genuine need, the church can help those people. But it's not some silly utopian thing like they talk about here. Let's look at chapter 4. Chapter 4 of the book of Acts is similar to that in verse 32. In chapter 4, verse 32, it says, "Now the multitude of those who believed were of one heart and of one soul. Neither did anyone say that any of their things that he possessed was his own, but they had all things in common. And with great power the apostles gave witness to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, and great grace was upon them all. Nor was there anyone among them who lacked, for all who were possessors of lands or homes sold them and brought the proceeds of them to those to that which was sold. And they laid it before the apostles' feet, and they distributed each one to his own, to anyone who had need." So it was an in-house thing of taking care of the needs of the people in the church, a very small group of people, because the government couldn't do it and wouldn't do it. So they wouldn't, maybe they could have, but they wouldn't have never done that. The Romans did not care about the Jewish people. In fact, they looked to exterminate them at one point, not too far down the history from this. So this small group of people saw to their own needs because the government never would. So all these people that say Jesus was a socialist, well, was he really? Did he advocate for taking something from someone else and giving it to someone else involuntarily, and that the government would be somehow overseeing all of that? If Jesus was a socialist, that's how socialism works. You have a group of people, nobody has more than anyone else. You take from those who have and you give it to those who do not have. It's involuntary, and it's done by the people who are in power. All of this was done in fellowship in the early church because of a desire to do it. People would say, I have been blessed, I'm going to take care of those people of my own belief. And it was within the church. That's it. It wasn't a system like we see in the nonsense of socialism today. There's not a place on the planet where socialism works. And the people who live well under socialism are the ones who are in control of it, but everybody else only has shared misery. Everywhere where it's ever been tried, that's the way it is. Look at the countries around the world that trust or that follow the socialist or even the communist view of how things should be, and it is a disaster. Look at what Solomon has to say in Proverbs about the lazy person, the one who doesn't work, doesn't eat. That's all throughout the Old Testament. No one was expected to just coast. Everyone was supposed to provide for themselves and not look for someone else to do it. So this idea that Jesus was a socialist, you don't find that in his teachings at all. When a man said, "What must I do to be saved?" to Jesus, he said, "Sell everything that you have and give it to the poor." Great. That's not socialism. That is really living according to the law, that there are people who cannot provide for themselves. You have the things to provide for them, so why don't you go sell what you have and make up that need? That is not socialism. That is basically the children of Israel seeing to the needs of one another. It doesn't work in a country, and it never works when a government's in control of it, because governments are corrupt. So again, the idea that Jesus was a socialist, that's fanciful. It sounds great on paper, but it doesn't wash when you look through what the text has to say, nor do you see Jesus advocating for socialism as we understand it. Give everything to the government, or a large portion of what you have to the government, and let them redistribute it to everyone else. So again, people love to quote the Bible because they don't know it. They think that they do, but if anybody ever took the time to read through it, they would understand that they genuinely don't understand what they think that they do. So how do you answer that? Was Jesus a socialist? First of all, tell them, give me your best evidence of how that's supposed to work. And every instance that they will give you, you're able to say, well, if you really look at that closely, it was not government supplied socialism. And it wasn't mandatory, it was voluntary. God asked them to do it, but we could see that they were genuinely not doing it by and large. In the church age, even less so. The church saw to the needs of the church, and it was not even something quite as straightforward as the law made it. It was actually codified. It was in the law. Here's what you do for the widow and the orphan among your people. Well, the church, the principle's great. Let the church take care of its own people, but let the idea that somehow Jesus would have said, yeah, give your money to the government and let the government redistribute it to people because they'll do it equitably. How ridiculous. When governments are so unbelievably corrupt, the idea that Jesus would advocate for that just shows how silly people can become, because they just genuinely don't know anything about what the scripture has to say, and then they write silliness like this. So anyway, just thought it'd be kind of an interesting thing to go through. If you encounter those people who say Jesus was a socialist, tell them to prove it, and then look at what they have as their evidence, and it's pretty comical. So gave you some examples there. If you have any questions on any of this, If you're not a subscriber to the channel, I hope that you will become one. We put out content multiple times a week. Bible studies are Old Testament on one day of the week, Mondays, and New Testament is on Thursdays. And then we put out a couple of topical, basically shorts on YouTube, like what I just did here about his Jesus being a socialist. We put those out as their own little shorts, so they're easily kind of bite-sized, and you don't have to go through and find where they are in the main study. So we do kind of those things in combination. You have any questions about anything that I've covered, you can contact me through the ministry's website, which is oldpaththeology.net. And I love hearing from the listeners or the viewers. We can also have you comment on the YouTube channel if you have questions that you'd like to have answered in there.